We are talking about Jewish survival, and we gave a rundown of the elements of evidence that we have to explain. And yesterday we tried the first very common attempted explanation in terms of persecution. And we showed that using persecution to explain Jewish survival is really a non-starter. Many cultures have disappeared because of persecution. In one documented case, Jewish culture in the Soviet Union was almost completely wiped out in 70 years. From 3 million identified Jews in 1900, if you have 250,000 left, which is less than 10%. So you have 90% of the population is wiped out in 70 years of persecution. Contemporary United States, with the explosion of population on the right, is not predicted by that model. And the model just doesn't get the facts right. Oh, and the first 1,000 years, when we have our own country, it's hard to appeal to persecution to say that that's why we survived during that 1,000 years. Now, there's another idea that people use, some people, and that is that different cultures have different strengths and weaknesses, as you would naturally expect. The Russians are good at writing novels, and the Dutch are very good at painting, and the Germans are good at lots of things, like math and philosophy, and also painting and science. The United States is very good at inventing new technology. Japan is very good at marketing new American technology. Different cultures have different strengths and different weaknesses. Maybe Jewish culture is good at creating long-lasting cultural products. We have a gene or a genius or a combination. When we create cultural products, they last. Other people create cultural products that are interesting and attractive for a time, and they don't last. And ours last. That's the way the Jewish people are. There's a feature of the historical record, which I explained to you, which shows that that's not correct. And that feature was the experimental changes in the cultural form, which Jews engaged in all periods of Jewish history, and all of those experimental changes failed historically, only one succeeded. You have the idol worshippers, Jewish idol worshippers in the First Temple period. You have the Hellenistic Jews, the Second Temple period. I didn't mention it, but at the end of the Second Temple, you have the Essenes, the Sadducees, and other variations in pseudo-Jewish practice. You have the Marranos and the Karaites in the last 2,000 years. All of those experimental changes in the traditional Jewish formula for Jewish existence historically failed. If you claim that there's a genius, a special talent, it ought to work more than once. If I tell you that so-and-so is a great inventor, and he's been working on inventions for 45 years, and it's turned out one invention, I think you'll be skeptical of describing him as having great inventive talent. On the contrary, every Jewish cultural product, which isn't according to the classical pattern, the classical norm, has failed. So if anything, we're not good at creating long-lasting cultural products. So that explanation just isn't going to go. It's not going to fly. Now, I'm coming to probably the most, I'll give you another example before I do this. There's a fellow named Hillel Zeitlin who wrote a 2-volume work about the Second Commonwealth of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period, which I think it came out around 1950 or so, and it was considered a classic at the time. And he offered an explanation of Jewish survival. And here's how it goes. In the century or so before the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbis invented monotheism. I'm glad you're all sitting down. You're standing up, you might faint. The rabbis invented monotheism. Before that, Judaism and the Jews in that period were not monotheists. whatever they were. But they invented monotheism. And why did they invent monotheism? Because it's wonderful as a safeguard against exile. Monotheism is designed to preserve a group that's going into exile. Polytheism is going to be much inferior in exile. Why is that? Because if you're a polytheist, then your gods are located in a particular place. They work from that place. And that's, so I'm going to modify this in a second because he's leaving something out, but that's to a certain extent true. The Roman gods had their position in Rome. The Greek gods had their position in Greece. So were the Babylonian gods and the Egyptian gods, the Assyrian gods, the Persian gods. Their home base was localized. Imagine that you are a polytheist and you have your gods localized in your geography, and then you go into exile. The whole group goes into exile. So you are separated from your home base, which means you're separated from where your gods are. That's going to put strain on your religion. It's going to be very difficult for your religion to function. And then there'll be pressure for the religion simply to assimilate and disappear. But if you're lucky enough to be a monotheist, and if you have rabbis who are clever enough to invent monotheism, then there's only one God, period. So that one God is running all of the world everywhere. So if you are exiled and scattered, you're not separated from your God. Your God is everywhere. So your religion can remain strong, you can remain connected, attached, and thereby survive in exile. And that's why Judaism survived, because it's a monotheistic religion, as against all the other ancient cultures which disappeared, which were polytheistic. Those that ended up in exile, you can explain why they disappeared. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ask this right, but can you explain what you mean when you say they created monotheism?
It means that before that, Jewish beliefs were not monotheistic. Jews recognized there's two possibilities, but they weren't strictly monotheists. You're asking, so I'll tell you. We think that there are two alternatives, monotheism and polytheism. There's really a third alternative called henotheism, H-E-N-O theism. Henotheism means that I'm not prejudiced. There could be 162 gods. I've chosen to live with one God. I've chosen to worship only one God. But as far as the existence of other gods, I'm not prejudiced. Could very well be that there are lots of them. I've just chosen to pledge allegiance to one of them and only one of them. Yeah.
So then could you define what the word God means? Or what that concept entails? Because I understand God as the creator of all beings.
But then you're ruling out polytheism also. Yeah. Right. So obviously a polytheist doesn't believe in creator of all beings. If he did, there would be only one God, the creator. Right? For them, God means a power which is above and beyond what you normally call natural. And it's a power that's in the hands of an agent with a personality who can make decisions how that power should be applied, and who has power beyond what we normally associate with our powers. They don't die, and they don't get sick, and they may fight each other, but beyond that they don't. And that's what they mean by God. Something it's worthwhile to serve because you can get favors from it. They can bring the rain, and that's very important for survival. They can have fertility and victory in war, and so on, because they have those powers. So it's worthwhile serving them. They build a religion around them.
Okay, if you ask a Jew on the street now, they would say, well, there's only one God, because as you're saying, the rabbis invented monotheism.
That's what Zeitlin says. They invented it in the end of the Second Temple period because they foresaw there was going to be destruction. They foresaw there was going to be exile, and they created this as a way to maintain your identity in exile. How they foresaw this was all going to happen, I mean, if you only believe in the natural world, I think that's a puzzle also. But he doesn't explain that. He just says they created this as a safeguard to keep us alive in exile, and he claims it works.
Now, how is henotheism? Would you say that was something that was in the philosophy of Abraham or Shem and Eber?
I would certainly not say that. I understood that they were monotheists all the way back. And as far as I know, no one ever announced himself to be henotheist. This was invented by historians who are trying to interpret things in their way. So, the Shema, which we take as our statement of monotheism, they want to downgrade that into, we're pledging allegiance to this one God. We won't pledge allegiance to any other gods, but we're not prejudiced about the existence of other gods. I mean, that's a modern invention.
So that theory isn't very popular then. The one that the Ziegler guy said.
Zeitlin, no, but again, he asked me a question. I was answering him. I was not representing Zeitlin. I was just answering his question about what the beliefs were supposed to be before that. I don't remember Zeitlin talking about that. What he talks about simply is that the monotheism that we have comes from the Second Temple period, and they invented it as a safeguard against exile.
And is that theory popular or is not really?
I don't think it's popular today, but I want to show you what's wrong with it inherently. These things have fashions; they go in and out.
Is he Jewish?
Yeah, Hillel Zeitlin,
Zeitlin.
Zeitlin, Zeitlin.
I need to hear the last name. Hello. Just
Yeah. Well, now let's think about this, boys and girls. Let's try the logic out. When the Romans conquered England, 1,000 miles from home, was Jupiter helping them or not? You bet. Jupiter was right there with them, 1,000 miles from home. They built altars to Jupiter in England. They didn't feel disconnected from their gods because they were 1,000 miles from home. They had no problem with that. The fact that your God has a localized residence doesn't mean he can't follow you into battle and be connected to you and give you victory in battle. You're not cut off if you're disconnected from home. So that part of the picture is not strictly correct. Secondly, even though we are monotheists, the land of Israel is very, very special. God causes his presence to dwell and be felt only in the land of Israel, only in the city of Jerusalem, and only in the temple. With the temple destroyed and the Jews in exile, the majority of 613 commandments aren't in operation. If the Jewish religion is based on its commandments, when we are destroyed and in exile, the majority of the religion can't be practiced. That's a disaster. Even if you're a monotheist and believe that God exists and runs the world in England, but your religion has taken a terrible hit. It's not a matter of trivial concern that you are separated from the land of Israel. So both sides of the argument are unpersuasive. Okay, but now I'm going to come to the most popular type of argument, and this will require some extended consideration. The thought here is that in the Jewish religion, you have rules, values, practices, literature, which naturally promote survival. They just naturally promote survival. Let me give you some parallels to the kind of thought that this is. If you want to improve your health, one of the things you can do is exercise. Not all exercise routines are equal. They're not all equal. Some exercise routines kill people. I remember one of the advocates of running, a fellow named James Fix. His last name was spelled F-I-X-X. He dropped dead running. Some people thought maybe his workout schedule wasn't the best. They're not all equally good. Some give a person a sense of satisfaction and give him a sense of steady progress, and he doesn't pull any muscles or break any bones so that he gets interrupted. And then people will find that exercise routine something which naturally motivates them because they're getting stronger and they're becoming healthier, they have more endurance, and the steps are moderate steps which they feel that are successful. It fits the psychology and it fits the physiology of the body. It fits the way the muscles and the bones work. Other workout routines don't have that. So some workout routines will be naturally popular and will be perpetuated over time, and others will go into extinction because they don't fit people very well. Diets. Some diets, have staying power. People adopt them and they stay with them and they actually improve their health through them. And others are popularized and people try them out and they drop them because they're too hard or too unpleasant or whatever. Unrealistic. You lose a lot of weight very quickly, but you can't sustain it. So 10 years later, you're back where you were at the beginning. Exercise routines can be naturally sustained. Diets can be naturally sustained. Certain types of literature, certain books become classics. And they stay classics, at least for a while. Now nobody reads anything, so the classics aren't classics anymore. But there were things which remained classics for hundreds of years. Why? Because they appeal to something in human psychology, in human life, in the way people grapple with problems. Shakespeare, when people still read, Shakespeare was thrilling to hundreds of years of readers. Other works were read for a little while and just discarded. So we see that certain cultural products naturally fit the human condition and will be perpetuated, and others don't naturally fit the human condition. This now is not the appeal to genius or genes of creating things that are just maybe by accident. We happen to come up with a formula that fits human life in such a way that it's going to perpetuate itself, and others didn't come up with such a formula. That's the thought. And the thought is substantiated or backed up by certain obvious reflections. Take, for example, kashrus. Laws of kashrus mean we can't eat at other people's tables. They can eat. All right, we can invite them for a meal. They can eat with us, but we can't eat with them. Probably, if it's a one-way social relationship, it's not going to be very close. It's not going to be very. People don't like to have a one-way relationship. They like to have a mutual relationship. Then it's going to set up a barrier. Because we have a food taboo, that's going to set up a barrier between us and others, and therefore it's going to reduce the impact that other people will have on us. We're not going to be that friendly, not going to be that close, we're not going to interact with them that much, and therefore their culture will not affect us that much. And that gives us a means to promote our own survival. Laws that set up social barriers will function as natural means to preserve your identity. Laws against intermarriage will have the same effect. The fact that you have your own holidays, which nobody else has. Your religion is codified in a language nobody else speaks. You have special clothing that you wear. All of this sets up social barriers between you and other cultures, and it's going to enable you to survive. And if you happen to have a very effective package of survival elements, then you'll be able to survive when other people don't. Other people don't have such an effective package. There's a lot of variety in the packages. You happen to have a package that enables that survival. There are elements in the Jewish religion that naturally promote Jewish survival. That's the explanation that's being offered. Are we together? It's a very popular type of explanation. Now, as I said yesterday, the thing to do is to take the explanation and match it against the evidence to see if it explains the evidence. That's never done. It's really what you get in the books is an appeal to the gut. Look, you can't eat at other people's tables, so you're not going to interact with them. So you're going to survive, right? Right, let's get a beer. It's over. We now understand everything. Let's start reviewing the evidence and see how well this explanation works. First of all, let's remember what we're trying to explain. We're trying to explain how we survived and others didn't. If all the ancient cultures survived, there'd be nothing to talk about. Survival would be universal and natural. No, we survived and others didn't. So the first question you ought to ask is, did other ancient cultures have food taboos? Because if they did, then the question will be, if food taboos set up a barrier and reduce the influence of other cultures on you and help you survive, how come the other ancient cultures that had food taboos didn't survive? Turns out that every ancient culture had food taboos, all of them. Steven Pinker, of whom I'm not a fan, cites this in one of his books from an anthropology study. All ancient cultures had food taboos. So now that casts a little doubt on the appeal to the food taboo. Maybe the intuition is there, but we don't make our decision on the basis of intuition. We make it on the basis of evidence. Do food taboos give you cultural survival or not? Well, if every ancient culture had food taboos and only we survived, that doesn't sound very good for the theory. Now, I want to point out a natural response at this point and show you how, as a point of logic, it doesn't work. And this will lead to the next point. Let me make this point, then I'll take your question. The natural response is, yeah, but they didn't have our food taboos. Only we have our package of food taboos. Each culture had its own package of food taboos. Maybe our package of food taboos promotes survival, and theirs doesn't. So already, if you're online from last week, you hear the key questionable word, which is maybe. Maybe. Sure, of course. Possible? Anything's possible. I give you that. It's irrelevant. We're talking about what you have evidence for. But I can make this point much stronger in this context. What's the appeal? The appeal is you and only you survived, and you and only you had these specific food taboos. So I'm going to say these specific food taboos are what enabled you to survive. That's what the critic is saying. I think there's a fallacy of logic here. Let me illustrate it fancifully. Who was the first runner to run the mile in under 4 minutes? British guy, Roger Bannister. People believed that if a runner runs a mile in under 4 minutes, he's going to drop dead. The human body isn't meant to go that fast. He did it the same year. 4 or 5 other people did it because it was like a superstition, like a psychological barrier. You just can't do that or you're going to die. He did it and he was alive. So then other people sort of allowed themselves to push themselves and they did it as well. Why was he the first one to do it? What was special about him that he was the first one to do it and not any other runner? I have a theory. He's the only one named Roger Bannister. That's true. No other runner was named Roger Bannister. So look, he's the first one to do it, and he's named Roger Bannister. So it could be that his name is what explains why. I hope you're not following this. I hope you think that this is quite stupid. It is quite stupid. Why? Because I have no evidence that the name is related to the running. It's not enough to say he did something unique and he has this unique characteristic, so the characteristic explains what he did. That's not good logic. You have to say he did something unique, he has this unique characteristic, and this unique characteristic affects what he did. Then you can say, maybe that's what explains it. Now, maybe he grew up in rural England where the name Roger was very unpopular, and the kids used to make fun of him, and they used to persecute him, had to run away from the kids who were chasing him, and that's how he became a great runner. Then, indeed, saying that he was the only runner with the name Roger might explain it. It might do it. But, of course, that's not true. So back to our situation. Our situation is this. The critic wants to cite food taboos as what gave us our survival. It's pointed out that every ancient culture had food taboos. And he backs up and he says, it's your specific package of food taboos that does the job. I call that the Roger Bannister fallacy. What independent reason do you have to think that rejecting shrimp promotes survival, but rejecting cows, like in India, doesn't promote survival? Or the Egyptian food taboos, or the Assyrian food taboos. What independent reason do you have to think that this package will do a better job than that package? If you don't have an independent reason, then saying that this unique package of food taboos is responsible for survival is the Roger Bannister mistake. It's really just appealing to something that's possible. It's something for which you have no evidence at all. You started off with a feeling that food taboos make sense. It makes sense because it's a barrier. It protects you from being influenced by other cultures. That's at least an intuition. I'm going to attack that intuition in a minute also. That's at least an intuition. When you're faced with the fact that every ancient culture had food taboos, including all the other ones that disappeared, you pick on the uniqueness of our food taboos. That's a Roger Bannister fallacy, where you have no independent reason to think whatsoever that our food taboos are different from the food taboos of the other ancient cultures. By the way, no one has raised this question. No one has raised this question. It shows you, in my mind, the discussion of Jewish survival among Jewish historians is not a serious discussion. It doesn't pay attention to the elementary laws of logic. Now, you have a question.
Well, I was going to ask, I think you kind of answered it, but I was going to ask, was our package of food taboos like over and above other people's packages such that ours were like way more strict to like the nth degree? Or?
So first of all, no one has investigated that. I mean, if every ancient culture had food taboos, I mean, I didn't go and investigate all of them, but I would imagine there's a range of them. Some more strict and some less strict. You know, if you lived in India and you couldn't eat cows, that's the main food source. And there were times up until recent times when many people in India were starving to death. There's a lot of people and very little food. So, you know.
But like when you go to, kosher is a little different because just because you can't eat a particular food doesn't mean you can't still go to another person's table and eat the other foods. Like if the utensils are not kosher, you literally can't eat it at that table.
That's true. Although I would say here you're going to get into a wealth of detail. Most of that is rabbinic. The rabbinic laws don't go back to Sinai, so you'll have to account for its survival during the period of time before those rabbinic laws came into detail. You have a vegetarian society, then everything's free. You can do whatever you want. In fact, there are to this day vegetarian restaurants run by non-Jews to which Jews frequent, because if there really are all, let's say, a vegan, vegans are worried about absorption into the walls of the vessel, very much like kashrus. They're very serious about it. Anyway, but so that's the first problem, that you want to be aware of the Roger Bannister mistake. And there's another problem. Let's go back to the intuition. Well, but it's going to set up a barrier. This intuition is based on a hidden assumption. It's going to set up a barrier if it works. It's going to set up a barrier if it works, but there's no guarantee that it's going to work. I'll give you an example of how it works in kashrus, and I'll give you an example of how it works in intermarriage. Every Jewish population in the world is an immigrant population. Came from someplace else. Now let's imagine the experience of an immigrant. In New York City, 1880s through the 1930s, was a gigantic influx of Jews. Also non-Jews, Italians and Irish and Greek and Polish, and it was gigantic immigration. And there were Jewish sections in New York, and also Irish and Italian and Greek and all other sections. It was tough. If you came from Poland, you didn't speak the language, you didn't have any skills that were saleable in the United States. Maybe you knew somebody, so you'd have someplace to sleep on the floor or something, but it was tough. Let's imagine a Jew comes in and he's just floundering. And a local Italian says to him, "You're having trouble. I've been here for 10 years already. I'm set. Let me help you. Let me help you. I'll show you where you can get schooling in the English language. I'll show you where you can get job training. If you need money in the meantime, I'll lend you some money." He helps him, befriends him, and helps him. And the Jew starts to get on his feet. At one point, the Italian says to the Jew, "My friend, come to me for dinner. We're having veal parmesan." Now, for those of you who are innocent of veal parmesan, let me tell you, because I know, it's veal cooked in cheese, and it's phenomenally good. It's one of those things that you just have to swear off, when you become frum. So now this poor Jew is stuck in a trap. What is he going to do? He's leaning on this Italian. He needs him. He doesn't want to upset him. He doesn't want to insult him. On the other hand, kashrus says no. And you can imagine some Jews going one way and some Jews going the other way. Some Jews saying, "No, I'm not going to take a chance. I'm sorry. I appreciate it. I hope you'll understand." And other Jews saying, "Okay, this once. I can't endanger the help that I'm getting from this Italian." Suppose he goes and eats. That means once he's broken the laws of kashrus. Breaking the laws of kashrus means he is now less tightly connected to the Torah. One break can lead to another break. It's going to reduce his connection to the Torah. Now here's the key point. Imagine a new Judaism, Judaism's star. It's all of Judaism minus kashrus. There's no kashrus. Let's run through the scenario again. He comes in, this Italian takes care of him, befriends him. "Come to my house for supper, we're having veal parmesan." The Jew says, "Great, sounds terrific." He goes, he enjoys it. thanks to the Italian, he's broken no Jewish rule. His connection to the Torah is not any less than it was before. Who's better off, do you think? The second Jew under Judaism's star without kashrus, or the first Jew under Judaism where he has to make that decision and he decides wrongly to go and eat the veal parmesan, breaking the kashrus rule? Who's better off in terms of survival? Could very well be that the second Jew is better off because he hasn't broken any Jewish rule, whereas the first Jew has broken a Jewish rule. By having the rule of kashrus, you're going to guarantee that a certain number of Jews are going to break the rules and become detached. It means having the rule of kashrus on the books has a mixed effect. It doesn't have a uniform effect of protecting Jewish identity. It'll have a mixed effect. For some people it will protect, and for some people it will endanger, will damage their Jewish identity. What you really would need is a bottom line assessment as to which is stronger. Is the damaging effect stronger or the protecting effect stronger? That's not obvious. That's not obvious. Indeed, early reform in Germany threw over kashrus for this very reason. Early reform in Germany wasn't trying to kill the Jewish religion. They weren't preaching convert and become Christians or become atheists. No, they said if you maintain kashrus, you're going to lose your Jews. Jews in Germany did convert to Christianity. It did happen. Moses Mendelssohn's grandchildren converted to Christianity. They said, if you practice kashrus, you can't go to university, you can't get a job, you can't make it in the society of the non-Jewish German world. Many Jews aren't going to put up with that. They just aren't going to put up with it. And they aren't going to put up with it. They're going to break those. When they break that, they're going to throw over the whole thing. Judaism will be better off without kashrus. They assessed that some effect of kashrus is negative on Jewish identity, Jewish survival. That's why they threw it over. Okay, now, time for a trick question. But someone will say, we know they're wrong. We know they're wrong because the movement that threw over kashrus and other similar things is dying. Has been dying and is dying. And those who kept kashrus are surviving. So you see that kashrus actually promotes survival. That's a mistake. What's the name of the mistake? It's the Roger Bannister mistake. All you have is a correlation. Those that held onto kashrus survived. Those that threw over kashrus are disappearing. You don't have any reason to think that that's the cause. That's what we're discussing, whether it's the cause or not. We're discussing whether or not its sum total effect is positive or negative. Maybe we survived in spite of kashrus. Not because of kashrus, but in spite of kashrus. Just pointing out that we survived the week of kashrus is not a good enough reason to say that kashrus made us survive. That's the Roger Bannister mistake. Yeah.
Did you just say that if you break kashrus, you're breaking your attachment to the Torah, and then you'll eventually integrate?
Right.
So if you keep the entire Torah, you're not breaking your connection, and then you keep your tradition.
I agree to that. But the question now is, in terms of the survival of the whole people, let's imagine that you have a terrible disease, and you have an experimental drug, and as far as the tests show, that drug is successful in a certain percent of cases, but in a certain percent of cases, the drug itself is lethal. So of course, at the very least, you'd want to know which group is bigger. If it cures 10% of the people who have the disease and kills 30% of the people who take it, and the numbers are right, you're worse off taking it, not better off taking it, right? So you want to know which effect is bigger. I say, yeah, but look, when it cures somebody, he stays alive, he's healthy. That's true. When it cures somebody, it in fact keeps him alive and he stays healthy. But if it kills more people than it cures, then its effect on the survival of the whole is negative, not positive. So of course the ones who keep it are going to survive. That's not the question. The question is, if I'm making up a set of rules and I want to put in a rule that's going to promote survival, I got to put in a rule that on the whole will have a positive effect on survival. Not one that loses 90% but keeps 10%. That's not a rule that I'm going to put in. Sure, it'll keep the 10%, but if you're losing 9%, that's the cost, then I'm not going to put it in. And the fact that those who kept it survive doesn't mean that its effect on the whole is positive. It could be negative. That's the Roger Bannister mistake. So I'm now attacking that intuition by pointing out the historical circumstances under which these rules have to be put into practice are historical circumstances under which not all the rules are going to be kept. And since they're not all going to be kept, when they're not kept, they're going to have a negative. They're going to have a drag. They're going to drag people down. Then it's not obvious that this rule is what maintains survival. Now, I'll give you one more example of this, and I'll leave it for today. We'll review this tomorrow, as we always do. Take intermarriage. Sailor W. Baron, one of the celebrated historians, Jewish historians of the 20th century. I'm not very impressed, but in secular terms, he's considered one of the main Jewish historians. Writes that in the Second Temple period, towards the end of the Second Temple period, let's say the last century or more, there was such a mix of populations in the land of Israel that those who lived as Jews and lived the Torah were a minority, and it was hard to find spouses. Hard to find spouses, and therefore he says intermarriage was quite widespread. Now, I don't necessarily trust his facts because I know of at least one mistake that he made, gigantic mistake, made on the basis of prejudice. So but if he's right, it's another example. We have a rule against intermarriage. Not every religion has such a rule. Not every religion has a rule against intermarriage. We have a rule against intermarriage. If you're in a situation where it's hard to find spouses, you want to get married, you want to have a family, and you're forced into intermarriage, then you're forced into breaking a Jewish rule. When you break a Jewish rule, you've weakened your connection with the Torah as a whole. So then you have to ask, having this rule against intermarriage, its sum total effect, is it positive or negative? It's going to vary from time to time, from place to place, circumstance to circumstance. You can't just assume that because I have a rule that says we should be detached from the surrounding cultures, that it will have a positive effect. If it says detach, and some people don't detach, for them it's going to have a negative effect. You'd have to make a sum total evaluation of its effect on balance. No one has even thought of this question. In the reading that I have done, no one has even asked this question. And that means that at the very least, those who put forward this kind of explanation have no reason to think that it's an accurate.
We're talking about a practical, how do you call it, detachment. Like whenever someone does an affair, it's like a spiritual, that relation with the Torah. But as far as it being practical, as far as the science point of view, like, it really that detachment doesn't really make any.
No. You're putting me on a different dimension. I'm talking about the psychological effect of knowing you've broken a rule. The fact that you break a rule means you're less attached to the rules. I remember people who told me that they came from Europe, and they came to America, and everybody worked on Shabbos. And many people told me, I believe that I'll turn on a light switch on Shabbos, I'll be struck by lightning. That was the way to do it. But they turned it on, they weren't struck by lightning. The second time was much easier. Not because they strayed in supernatural, spiritual realms, just psychologically. When you do it once, and then it's easier to do a second time. And then the second time it's easier to do a third time. And you're on the way out. You're on the way out.